The year is 1932. You walk into a grocery store in small-town America, and the shopkeeper looks at you with exhausted eyes. "Cash or wood?" he asks. You pull out a rectangular piece of spruce from your pocket about the size of a playing card with 25 cents stamped across it in fading ink. He nods, takes your wooden money, and hands you a loaf of bread. This isn't some post-apocalyptic fantasy. This actually happened. And the story of how an entire town and eventually hundreds of communities across America started printing money on literal wood is way more insane than you think. Let's set the scene. 5th of December in 1931. Tenino, Washington. Population? Roughly 1,200 people. It's a logging town, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where the local newspaper is run by one guy in a cramped office, and where the entire economy revolves around timber and agriculture. Then the Citizens Bank of Tenino fails. Just collapses. Doors locked. Deposits frozen. Gone. Now, imagine you're a Tenino resident in December 1931. You wake up one morning, and every dollar you've saved your entire life, savings is suddenly inaccessible. The bank isn't temporarily closed for repairs. It's done. And here's the kicker. This isn't just happening in Tenino. By 1933, over 9,000 banks across the United States had failed. 1 in 4. Your money wasn't just trapped, it had essentially evaporated. But you still need to eat. Your kids still need shoes. The electric company still wants payment. So what do you do when there's literally no money circulating in your town? Enter Don Major, Chamber of Commerce Secretary, newspaper publisher, and apparently the only guy in Tenino with a functioning brain during a crisis. Major looks around at this economic wasteland and thinks, "We need money. The government isn't helping. The banks are dead. So, let's just make our own." His first attempt? Paper scrip. He printed emergency currency on regular paper, backed by the promise that local businesses would accept it. It worked. For about 2 weeks. Then the paper started falling apart. People were literally watching their money disintegrate in their wallets from normal wear and tear. So Major had a thought that can only be described as beautifully unhinged. What if we printed money on wood? Late December in 1931. Major walks into a local lumber mill with the most ridiculous request they've probably ever heard. "I need thin slices of spruce, about the size of a dollar bill, smooth enough to print on." The mill workers probably thought he'd lost his mind. But this is a logging town during the Depression. They've got wood coming out of their ears and nothing else to do with it. So they start cutting. By February 1932, Tenino begins issuing official wooden scrip. They're printing denominations of 25 cents, 50 cents, and $1 on these thin wooden rectangles. The town uses Major's newspaper printing press, the same one that prints the local news, to stamp the denominations and serial numbers onto spruce. Here's what made this system brilliant. The wood was actually more durable than paper money. You could drop it in a puddle, and it wouldn't disintegrate. You could fold it, kind of, carry it in your pocket, and it wouldn't tear. It was literally harder currency than actual currency. But there's a catch, because there's always a catch. To prevent hoarding and keep the money circulating, which was the entire point, Tenino required holders to buy a 2-cent stamp every week and affix it to the back of the wooden note. No stamp? Your wooden dollar was worthless. This was genius. It created a built-in expiration system that forced people to spend rather than save, keeping money flowing through the local economy. The system worked. Local businesses accepted wooden money. The grocery store, the hardware store, the doctor, everyone took it. Between December in 1931 and 1933, Tenino issued $10,308 worth of wooden scrip. And here's the most insane part. Only $40 was ever redeemed. People kept the wooden money as souvenirs, which meant the town essentially got a $10,268 interest-free loan from its own citizens. News travels fast when you're doing something completely insane. By March 1932, just 1 month after the major wooden issuance, Tenino's wooden money became a national sensation. Senator Clarence Dill entered the story into the congressional record. Pathé News, one of the major newsreel companies of the era, sent a film crew to Tenino to document this bizarre economic experiment. Suddenly, this tiny logging town in Washington was getting more press coverage than most state capitals. And then the copycats arrived. See, Tenino wasn't facing a unique problem. They were just the first to solve it in the weirdest way possible. Across America, hundreds of communities were dealing with the exact same crisis. No cash, failed banks, and populations on the verge of starvation despite having goods to trade. By 1933, nearly $1 billion worth of various scrip currencies were circulating across the United States. That's billion with a B. Iowa alone had over 30 communities issuing their own emergency currencies. Some used paper, some used metal tokens, and a surprising number said, "Screw it," and followed Tenino's lead with wood. But here's where it gets really interesting. Each community added their own twist. Some towns issued scrip backed by tax anticipation, basically IOUs against future tax revenue. Others backed it with commodities like grain or lumber. A few places got creative with materials. One town used leather, another used cardboard, and at least one community allegedly used pressed fish scales, though that might be Depression-era urban legend. The variety was insane. You could travel 50 miles and your money would be completely worthless. It was like every town had its own cryptocurrency, except made of wood and actually useful. Now, you might be thinking, wait, isn't printing your own money illegal? And you'd be right to ask. The US Constitution explicitly gives Congress the power to coin money. Private currencies were technically illegal. But here's the thing. The federal government was completely overwhelmed. The Depression had broken the entire financial system, and Washington, D.C. was scrambling just to keep the country from descending into complete chaos. So they looked at places like Tenino and made a calculation. Is this technically illegal? Yes. Is it actually hurting anyone? No. Is it preventing riots and starvation? Also, yes. Should we shut it down? Let's focus on bigger problems. The government essentially adopted a don't ask, don't tell policy toward local scrip. As long as communities weren't trying to pass off their wooden nickels as actual US currency, authorities turned a blind eye. But the scrip era couldn't last forever. When Franklin D. Roosevelt took office in March 1933, one of his first actions was declaring a bank holiday, a mandatory closure of all banks to prevent further runs. Then came the Emergency Banking Act, which stabilized the banking system and restored public confidence in actual US currency. Once real money started flowing again, the wooden money became obsolete almost overnight. By late 1933, most communities had stopped issuing scrip. The crisis that created the need had passed. Here's the beautiful irony. The wooden money that was supposed to be temporary and disposable became one of the most collectible artifacts of the Great Depression. Remember how only $40 of Tenino's $10,308 in wooden scrip was ever redeemed? That's because people realized these things were historical artifacts almost immediately. Depression-era Americans. People who had literally nothing chose to keep worthless wooden rectangles instead of exchanging them for real money when they could. Today, original Tenino wooden scrip pieces sell for between $100 and $500 depending on condition. The 25-cent wooden note that someone used to buy bread in 1932 is now worth 400 to 2,000 times its face value. That's a better return than Bitcoin. Tenino itself leaned into the legend. The town still issues commemorative wooden money for special events. During the 2020 COVID pandemic, another economic crisis, Tenino actually brought back wooden scrip as a promotional tool to support local businesses, issuing $10,000 in wooden currency. History doesn't repeat, but it sure as hell rhymes. So, what's the real lesson here? Because this isn't just a quirky historical anecdote, it's a fundamental truth about money that most people never grasp. Money is a collective hallucination. It only works because we all agree it works. A dollar bill is just fancy paper. A wooden scrip is just a piece of spruce. Neither has intrinsic value. But when a community agrees that something represents value and can be exchanged for goods and services, it becomes money. Tenino proved that you don't need a central bank, you don't need gold backing, and you don't even need paper. You just need trust and agreement. The wooden money worked because everyone in town trusted that the grocery store would accept it, and the grocery store trusted that the lumber mill would accept it, and the lumber mill trusted that the doctor would accept it. This is why cryptocurrency advocates get so excited about Bitcoin and Ethereum. They're trying to recreate what Tenino did in 1932, just with blockchain instead of wood. The technology changes, but the principle remains. Money is whatever we collectively decide it is. The Depression-era scrip movement also revealed something darker. How fragile our financial system actually is. We assume money will always be there, that banks are safe, that the system works. But in 1931 to 1933, that assumption collapsed. Thousands of banks failed. The money supply contracted by nearly a third, and regular people had to literally invent new forms of currency just to survive. It could happen again. In fact, it almost did in 2008. And when the next crisis hits, and there will be a next crisis, don't be surprised if communities start getting creative again. So the next time someone tells you that money needs to be backed by gold, or that only governments can create currency, or that our financial system is unshakable, just remember, there was a time when Americans bought groceries with wood. The system is more fragile than you think, but humans are more resourceful than you'd believe. If you want to see more bizarre economic stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about money, check out my video on Tulip Mania, the most bizarre economic crisis you've never heard of. It's about the time tulips became more valuable than houses, and it's just as insane as this one. Thanks for watching. And hey, if your local bank fails tomorrow, you know what to do. Just head to the nearest lumberyard